talk more about this story, we can bring in Andrew Hilliar from our International Affairs Desk. Hi, Andrew. Do we have more clarity then on who is running Venezuela?
We have a little bit of clarity at this stage. In Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, of course, now the interim leader, so nominally in charge of things. Initially defiant on Saturday following the capture of Nicolas Maduro, she's since shifted tone, calling for collaboration between Washington and Caracas. On Sunday, as you can see on this screen here, she was backed by Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez. That's, of course, very important in Venezuela, very important to have the support of the country's powerful armed forces. But essentially, what's going on in Venezuela is that Nicolas Maduro's allies, his inner circle, essentially the regime that was constructed by Hugo Chavez before Nicolas Maduro, it's still very much intact. And those figures that you just saw on your screen there, those are some of the key figures in Venezuela's ruling elite. It's evenly divided between civilian and military figures, Maduro's inner circle. So they really hold the reins of power. And under more than 2 decades of rule from first Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, essentially the United Socialist Party of Venezuela took control of key institutions, the National Assembly, most of the judiciary, the Electoral Council, and of course the military. So removing Nicolas Maduro from that power structure doesn't remove the power structure that's been built up over more than 2 decades. But what is happening is that, as we've seen, Donald Trump is exerting huge pressure on Venezuela's ruling elite to kind of essentially do what Washington wants. And we saw that with his latest comments to the Atlantic magazine, essentially telling Delcy Rodriguez that she would pay a very heavy price if she did not do what was right.
And Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, they seem to have kind of differing narratives on the US's role in Venezuela. Does the Trump administration have a plan?
Well, yeah, I mean, as we've seen, there are indeed 2 very different takes on the US role going forward in Venezuela, playing out at the very top of the US administration. Donald Trump, on the one hand, doubling down on his insistence that the US is running the show or will run the show in Venezuela. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, kind of offering a more nuanced take on the US role, saying that it would exert leverage on Venezuela using, for example, oil blockades as leverage. Either way, whichever way you look at it, what Washington does appear to be doing clearly at this stage is leaning on the current power structure, using coercion to try and twist its arm into doing what it wants. That ruling inner circle that we saw there, they've seen the pictures of Maduro blindfolded and taken into detention. They will be asking themselves, well, could we be next? And why is Donald Trump doing this? Well, he's made it very clear he wants access to Venezuela's oil. He says US oil companies are going to invest massive sums of money to build up the oil infrastructure, to get oil pumping again. Now, the problem here, as you're going to see on a graphic I'm going to show you, is that decades of mismanagement and underinvestment have left Venezuela's oil industry in a fairly catastrophic state. You can see there how the production of Venezuela's crude oil production essentially has plummeted, falling to about 750,000 barrels per day in 2023. It's now hovering at around 900,000 barrels per day. That situation worsened by US sanctions, meaning that the only US oil company currently operating in Venezuela is Chevron. They are operating thanks to an exemption to US sanctions. The reality is most oil companies unlikely to invest the massive sums of money required to rebuild Venezuela's oil industry unless there's political and institutional stability. Now, 2 companies, ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, actually left Venezuela in 2007 and sued the Venezuelan government. That's after Hugo Chavez at the time demanded that they cede majority ownership of their Venezuela projects to the government. Incidentally, another point I'll just make here is that, Trump is openly framing this around oil. He's not really framing it around democracy and human rights. And that is likely to cause to stir huge animosity in Venezuela. Removing Nicolas Maduro is one thing. some Venezuelans, a lot of Venezuelans even, may be happy to see the back of Nicolas Maduro, but falling under the direct influence of Washington, that's something else.
And what message does this send to other countries, the US's actions in Venezuela? Because some observers have been saying that it sets a dangerous precedent.
Well, I mean, the first thing it does, not surprisingly, is it deals another hammer blow to the rules-based international order. It is very difficult to find a legal justification for this. It appears to violate the UN Charter and Venezuelan sovereignty. On Sunday, 6 countries issued a joint statement. They are, you can see on your screen there, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain, kind of echoing the concerns of many countries and leaders around the world, rejecting the military actions carried out unilaterally by Washington on Venezuelan territory, which they say contravene fundamental principles of international law. Now, what happened on Saturday was, of course, a remarkable display of US military power. There were no American lives lost. On the Venezuelan side, there were dozens of lives lost from what we know. However, this has stirred, of course, a lot of dissenting voices within the US, unsurprisingly. And one comment I'll bring you from Senator Mark Warner. He's the Democratic vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, warning that because of this, what's to stop, he said, China claiming the same authority over Taiwan's leadership, or, he added, what's to stop Vladimir Putin using a similar justification to snatch Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky. You know, Donald Trump has clearly here demonstrated his belief in the power of using his will backed by US military force. He's already shown that he believes that he can ignore laws that don't appeal to him. The fear is that he isn't taking into account the ripple effects of this move, and that, of course, leaving many to worry that this could indeed set a precedent for other leaders, authoritarian leaders in particular.
All right, Andrew Hilliar, thank you very much for your analysis on that.